Hello, everyone. Welcome to our LinkedIn Live today, Become Future Ready with MIT CISR research scientist Stephanie Woerner. My name is Meg Regan. I'm a Senior Director for Executive Education at MIT Sloan School of Management. Also a lecturer in work and organization studies and an executive coach. I have the pleasure of working with many of the faculty from the Center of Information Systems Research on digital transformation work here at MIT Sloan. So I'm delighted to be here today with my friend and colleague, Stephanie Woerner. Stephanie is the executive director for the Center for Information Systems Research. She's a research scientist, and she's the author of many articles, case studies, and two fabulous books that help companies think about digital transformation. One is what's your digital business model, and the other one is Future Ready: the 4 pathways to capturing digital value, and that is actually coming out on October 18th. So that's really exciting. Welcome, Stephanie.
Thank you, Meg. I am delighted to be here and so excited to be talking about the past book and the forthcoming book. So let's kick off this discussion.
Sure, that's great. While we're doing that, maybe folks, if you can put in the chat, what's your role at your company or organization, so we can get a feel for your role in digital transformation. So let's just start out talking about digital transformation in general, right? Because one of the things we do at MIT is we think about the importance of having a common language and common understanding of the language and what it means. So what's the goal of a digital transformation? Let's start with that.
The goal of a digital transformation is for a company to become future ready. And when we talk about companies becoming future ready, we mean something really specific. We mean companies that are both operationally efficient and have a terrific customer experience. And so a company that is future ready is really ambidextrous. They're pulling out costs on one hand, and they're innovating, and especially innovating to bring that customer voice in, to meet the customer's needs, to figure out the problem that the customer is trying to solve. And so firms that are future ready, they are ambidextrous, they're modular. So they are thinking about creating components out of their processes and then using those components over and over again, reuse. They have a great customer experience, they're ecosystem ready, they're dynamically partnering, and they're using data as a strategic asset. And so that's how we think about what a transformation is trying to accomplish, to move those firms to become future ready.
Thanks for that, Stephanie. Maybe say a little bit about ecosystem. What is an ecosystem?
So an ecosystem is a network of companies and customers and partners and even suppliers that are all coming together on a platform to help solve customer needs. And it's good to have the customers in there because you actually want to be figuring out what is the job that they're trying to do. A lot of times we find companies that have products or they have services, and that's what they're selling, but that might not be what the customer wants. And so the ecosystem is this go-to destination for a customer to solve a particular problem. And it involves all of those entities that I talked about: the companies, the partners, the customers, the suppliers. And that is one of the key characteristics of a future ready company, is a company that is really ready to participate in an ecosystem.
Great. And give us an example of a great ecosystem.
Great ecosystem. So I can tell you about one that what I would call, I think it's a nascent. It's one that is starting to grow. So for instance, Bayer Monsanto has a agricultural ecosystem, and it's around using data. They bought a platform called Climate Field View. And on that platform, this allows farmers to bring all of the data that they have, and farmers have a lot of it. So they can input the data from their tractors. They can input the data from their fields. They can get weather data. They can get drone data. They can bring all of this together and then start to make decisions using that data. Remember how I talked about data as a strategic asset?
Mhm.
This is one ecosystem that really allows agriculture to use that data as a strategic asset. And then at the same time, Bayer Monsanto is bringing in other types of partners. They are bringing in the drone companies, and they're bringing in, say, the soil management, but they're also bringing in dealer services. They're bringing in, say, insurance companies. They're bringing in financial types of services that are particularly relevant for the farmer. And so that's how we think about an ecosystem. There are bigger ecosystems. I mean, I think that everybody would imagine, say, an Alibaba as an ecosystem or an
Mhm.
Amazon as an
Mhm.
ecosystem. But I think that there are more out there than we might imagine. And I
Mhm.
think that there's a lot of opportunity out there. Peter and I, when we talk about ecosystems, we often encourage companies to think about who are your best customers and can you create an ecosystem for them?
Got it. Got it. And when you mentioned Peter, that's Peter Weil,
Oh,
who's also a research scientist at MIT CISR and the co-author of these books with Stephanie. So they've done lots of work
yes,
together over
he's
the
my
years.
I mean, I talk about him as Peter because he's my longtime collaborator. I've been
Right.
working on it. We started working on a National Science Foundation grant in the early 2000s, and then he and I really became a research partnership back in 2008.
Yeah. Yeah. I just wanted to share with everyone
Yeah.
so they could know who we're referring to. I love this example of the Bayer Monsanto, right? Because it's not one that comes to mind right away. And you think about it. So what is a go-to destination? Instead of just trying to help farmers increase their yield, you're helping them increase the vibrancy of their entire farm and business, right? And giving them support in all different areas, be it with connecting them with other partners, data that they can use and learn from other farmers, and that sort of thing. So I love that example. So
Mhm.
so it sounds like we all need to be future ready, and hopefully we're all on the path there. I thought it would be cool if we could talk a little bit about what are the biggest challenges that companies and organizations have in starting a digital transformation, in starting that journey towards future ready.
So I think that there are, let's start with early on.
Okay.
I think early on, one is, do you have at least the start of a vision and can you begin to communicate it? But the piece around the communication that I think is probably the hardest thing that we see with companies is how do you create a common language around the transformation? So many of the terms that we use
Mhm.
can mean so many different things. And so, I mean, we have found this with, say, a term like platform. What does
Mhm.
that mean? Does it mean just the technical platform? Do you mean the operational backbone? Do you mean this idea that you're going to bring in the partners and the suppliers and the customers?
Mhm.
Or does
Is
it
it a
mean
shoe?
what?
Is it a shoe?
Is it a shoe? Yeah, these are all these things. And
Right.
if you don't get that right, you're not going to get everybody on the same page. And so
Mhm.
I think that the biggest challenge is right off the bat, let's get a common language. And that is one of the things that led us to write this book, which
Mhm.
is companies were starting on transformations. They had a sense of what they were trying to do, but they actually needed help figuring out what's the framework? How do we describe it? How do
Mhm.
we get everybody on the same page?
Mhm.
And so
Mhm.
we interviewed lots and lots of executives to figure out what it was that was driving them and what they were trying to accomplish.
Mhm.
And
Mhm.
that was the basis, that was the seed of the book, the initial seed.
I see. I see. In that common language, it sounds so simple, yet we see that it's amazingly powerful and impactful. So not just in defining the destination, what is future ready, and getting everyone on the same page with that, but also helping people understand what it's going to take, right? What it's going to take along the journey, how to execute it on it, how to prioritize and make decisions about where you spend your time and your resources. All of that comes from folks having a common understanding, building on frameworks and language that is easy to understand and explain to others. And I will say, it may be surprising to folks, but I think my colleagues at MIT are amazing at making really complex things easy to understand and learn. And so I think that's the power of these frameworks and that common language.
Mm-hmm.
So let's get to, all right, let's say we've defined future ready, and we have a common language. Yeah. But how do companies execute on it? How do you get people to understand what their jobs are and what they're going to need to be ready for, right? To get to that future ready state.
So the way that we see getting to future ready is and in talking to all of these executives, we identified 4 different pathways that companies can take to become future ready. So when we think about future ready, I already talked about future ready being companies that are ambidextrous, that are great at operational efficiency and customer experience.
Mm-hmm.
Most firms, if you put those 2 together, you get a 2x2. And we would say future ready is in the upper right-hand quadrant.
Okay.
If you look in the lower left-hand, that's where about 51% of firms are. Those are we call that silos and spaghetti. So that especially many older firms or very many large firms fall into this. And we call it silos and spaghetti because firms have gotten a product or a service and they build up everything that they need to do to make that product or service succeed. And then they have another idea and they build up another silo with that product and service. And then they figure, you know what we need to do? We need to connect those 2 because a lot of times you're able to create a solution if you can connect across your silos. And what we find is that companies end up with lots of point-to-point solutions. And that's where the spaghetti comes in. If you look at it, it looks like a plate of pasta. And you're not going to succeed in the digital economy with that. And so we see that firms that have started to work on the silos and spaghetti and the operational efficiency become what we call industrialized. And then firms that have had some threat from competitors and really are focusing on their customers move up to an integrated experience. And the 4 pathways describe the movement, say, from silos and spaghetti up to future ready. And I could describe those 4 pathways pretty quickly if you'd like me to do that. So the first pathway is this pathway along industrialized. It's firms that have this need and this understanding that they have to have a platform to succeed. And they're really going to focus on simplifying and automating and doing the one best thing and really thinking about reuse. It's really this efficiency type of play. And this pathway 1 is it's kind of shaped like a hockey stick. And this tells you where some of the issues are in this pathway, which is the early part of it. It's slow uptake. And this is where the common language comes in because you want to go and let people know what you're doing and make sure that they stay on that pathway. It's really a long slog at times.
Stephanie, I've heard you and Peter, I know you have some cute names for the pathways. I think you call this one the Digitization Desert.
That is exactly right. You are there. The goal is far off and you are it's hard work. And because you're not focusing on the customer experience, you often have this need, or you will have business units come in and say, we can't do this. We have to have some we have to address some of the customer needs. And it can pull you off that pathway so fast because what you're doing there is really internally focused.
Mm-hmm. One thing I think about though, when we're talking about pathway one is, if you just imagine the silos in spaghetti and what that looks like, things connecting like spaghetti all over the place. That's not a good thing for your customer, but darn, is that tough for your employees, right? They are doing heroics to try to give the customer a good experience while managing all of these things behind the scenes. So even though it's a slog, as you say, the payoff, I bet, for in the end for the employees and the customers is
it's
great.
really, really big, but it takes a while to get to that point. And that's the problem, is that you're asking your customers to wait, but your employees are also, they're still acting in heroics. I mean, you've got great employees. It's just that they have to do heroics to get something done. When you hit the point where you have that platform in place, you can really start to innovate. And that's where it becomes fun. But it requires a lot of discipline to get to that, to get to that point where you're rapidly innovating.
What are the other choices that we have?
So the other choices, the second is it's pathway 2. And on that one, we find a lot of companies that are facing a certain amount of competitive threat actually feel like they've got to go and solidify their relationship with their customers. And so this is a pathway where what you do is focus on your customer experience. And the goal there is to, again, cement that relationship with your customers, to improve your Net Promoter Score. And it's awfully fun because you're seeing the outcomes right away. The problem there is that you can keep on focusing on the customer without integrating in what you're doing, and you can actually make your complexity way worse. So we find there you have to have somebody who's willing to be what we call the traffic cop,
right?
Who's going to be looking at the cost to serve and saying, stop. Now let's spend some time working on that integration.
Because this one is going up, right? And to the right. So you're saying you're going up and you're getting all of this value for your customers. And wow, is it fun? It feels good. You're hearing great things. And you have to be responsible and saying, okay, at some point we need to make that turn. We need that traffic cop there because we need to also address the issues with the backbone and
the operational efficiency and your data and things like that. This is what Cemex did. As a company, they decided that they had an opportunity to work on their customer experience, and it would be a real source of competitive advantage. And so they built this mobile suite, this digital suite that was designed to help the job site manager. Usually up until Cemex Go, which is the name of the product they have, the job site managers, you could be there making sure that everything is happening on the job site, or you could leave the job site, go to the trailer, sit down, say, okay, I'm going to log in and I'm going to figure out how much cement I need. This new solution, it meant that the job site manager didn't have to leave. They could make arrangements on their mobile right then and there. They could track when their delivery was being made, and it was so popular that they hit 90% adoption within 12 months after. And what Cemex had to do, and they were disciplined enough to do it, is they said, we're going to do the initial, we're going to put this into place, and then we're going to stop, because if we don't, we're going to have two separate systems. We're going to have the digital system, and we're going to have the operational backbone
shadow system.
And what we need to do now is spend the time to link those two systems together, because otherwise we're going to have a great customer experience, but we're going to lose all operational efficiency because we'll have much more complexity.
Right. Now, I love the Cemex example, right? A cement company. So now we've talked about using digital transformation to impact, impact farming and construction, right? So everyone needs to be thinking about this for sure.
Absolutely. And we're seeing this across the board, that every company is starting to look at a digital transformation. And especially with COVID, when companies had to deal with their employees going remote, when all of a sudden they couldn't really talk to their customers face to face, what are you going to do? And we saw companies that they were amazing. They turned on a dime. And I think they accomplished more in, say, 3 to 6 months. They often took 5-year plans and accomplished them in 3 to 6 months. It was very exciting to learn from our sponsors and patrons about what they were doing and how fast they were actually doing it. It was really terrific.
So Pathway 2, is that dessert first?
It's dessert first. Yes, you're doing something fun. The other good thing about Pathway 2 is that because you're going out and you're listening to the voice of the customer, you're actually doing some testing and learning, and you're figuring out what actually should be in your platform. With a Pathway 1, those companies have an idea and a plan. With a Pathway 2, you're actually more likely to get the platform that's going to fit what you've accomplished with the customer initiatives.
Okay.
We could move on to Pathway 3.
Yeah, let's. I want to, and I want to come back to test and learn, but we'll do that later.
Right. Well, there's going to be test and learn actually across all of these pathways. It's just that Pathway 2, especially in the customer experience piece, is very, you're going to see that a lot. But Pathway 3 is really around taking incremental steps. And it's one that a lot of companies, it feels very natural to them. They're going to do, say, a customer experience or a transformation, an operational efficiency initiative. And then they'll turn and they'll move and they'll do the opposite. And that pathway works best when you can kind of chunk up your transformation into 6 to 9 month chunks. Where it's hard is that there's a couple of places. One is you have to be disciplined to actually make those changes. 2 is you have to be able to communicate those changes. So we find that you really need a dashboard so that people can see what is happening. And you need, as part of that dashboard or related to that dashboard, you need a roadmap. You need people to know what's the next step. And you need to have the governance to change the focus from operational efficiency to customer experience and back again.
So it looks like stair steps.
It looks like stair steps. This is, as I said, very popular. Some of the, we've talked to KPN, a telecommunications company. First, their transformation was this. They did they came in, looked and said, oh my goodness, we have 81 different products and we're a very small telecommunications and we're not taking advantage of the products that can go together. So the first thing that they did was kind of freeze. They froze the number of products and said, okay, let's work on that. Then they decided that what they needed to do was work on that front end. So simplify that front end, bring in new talent who could go and deal with a customer experience on the front end. And then they froze the back end because that was so complex. And they put in an API layer so that they could start to figure out which part of the back end they were going to keep, and then also still continue to serve their customers. And then they did some more simplification, reduce the number of products. And then finally, they did a core, they replaced a lot of the back end. And so that was an operational efficiency move. So kind of this stair step. This is one, DBS Bank, which is considered to be the best digital bank in the world or the best bank in the world. Followed this. Schneider Electric followed this pathway. When you get really good at it, And you don't get good at it until you're several years in. You start to be able to actually do both of those at the same time, and you start to figure out how to turn those stair steps. They just become smaller and smaller and smaller until you hit kind of a 45-degree line.
So the key here on pathway 3 is just communication and
communication, governance, and dashboards, roadmaps.
Yeah, because sometimes, your employees can feel like they have whiplash, right? You're going up and then you're going right, and you're going up and right. Yeah.
Okay. And then the last pathway is when you throw your hands up and you say, I cannot get here from there. I just can't. I need to just have a future ready platform right off the bat. And we see a number of companies doing this. It's really around innovation. It's around, and sometimes it's because your back end, your existing legacy is so behind, you just can't do it. Sometimes a company will have a great idea and decide that they're going to go from there. So you can think about many of the banks that are doing digital banks. This is path 4. So ING, when they did ING Direct, they designed a digital bank. It was completely separate from their other banks. They had no branches, really a whole new way of working, of dealing with your customers. And then you hit a point where you have the big problem with the path 4 is you need to be thinking about what is it you're going to do if you succeed. And there are a couple of things that you can do. One is you can take all of the learnings and fold them back into what we call the mothership. And that's hard. This is what ING has been doing. If you look at what ING has done with ING Direct, it is no longer a brand. And they're trying to take those learnings and really transform the mothership. Another is you can keep the two going at the same time. And now that's really tough because now you have two business units. Are they doing the same thing? Right. Do they have the same customers? You have to really be thinking about that. If you look at Bancolombia started a new unit called NECI, and they designed that unit for the unbanked. It was really part of their mission, and it was it started out with simple banking, transactions, getting people to be comfortable with banking, using the language. But at the same time, when they designed it, they decided that it could also be an opportunity for them to learn. And so a lot of times they would try something in NECI, and then if it was successful, bring it back and into Bancolombia. And for the longest time, they thought, well, we can coexist with these two because they're very different customer. And it's okay. But COVID changed all that. COVID made that all of a sudden, NECI became very popular because it was so digital. Bancolombia kept moving all of those learnings into their own. And then finally they had two banks that did exactly the same thing. And so what they decided to do is make NECI its own business unit with its own mission, which was around the unbanked, and keep Bancolombia, they've integrated those learnings. The third thing that you can do is you can spin it off. And that happened with Domain in Australia. Domain was a innovation out of Fairfax Media. Fairfax Media was an old-timey media company that, much like has happened in the United States and other places, classified ads, which used to really drive the
home ownership play, right?
Well, it was a home ownership because they had already lost, the big three classified ads were cars, real estate, and cars, real estate, and hiring, jobs. And so Fairfax looked around. They were a little behind the U.S. Craigslist really took out all of that here. here in the United States. And Fairfax looked and said, we've lost one of those three. We better do something because we're going to lose it if we don't do it. And they set up they set up kind of a skunk works, and they designed a home ownership play. They designed a unit that re-envisioned what those real estate ads were. They said, it's not really just about looking at ads. It's really about dreaming about owning your own place. And it is digital. It was very successful. It really mapped the customer journey. And finally, Fairfax hit a point where they looked at it and said, this is a great innovation. We really shouldn't be running it. And so they spun it off, and they, unlocked $750 million Australia dollars. And it's still it's still an ongoing concern. So those are the 4 pathways that you have.
That's a great. And then that fourth one is represented with a circle. Wait, a square.
Well, it's what we think of. Peter Weil is a huge Star Trek fan. I will tell you that. So we often call it the mothership, but we represent that as a donut. And really, we think of the new unit as a square peg, which is, can you fit that square peg into that round hole? And it is hard work to do that.
Yeah. Okay. So I'm seeing there are, I have my eye on the chat, Stephanie, and I'm seeing there are lots of questions, as you would expect, about budget and time. But before we get to that, can a company be on more than one pathway?
Oh, absolutely.
Okay.
Now, you're going to see this much more in companies that have multiple business units. I'm going to argue, if you have one business unit, you should not be on multiple pathways. Okay. You are asking your people to hold 2 different languages with 2 different ways of approaching that transformation, and they're gonna butt heads. But companies that are large with multiple business units, absolutely, you can have multiple pathways. And we see many companies do a regular transformation, say for their a path 1 or a path 2 or a path 3, and then they add in a new business unit, which would be a path 4. So that's very, very common. The real issue there is, are you coordinated? We found that the worst place to be was multiple pathways, but not thinking about the coordination, because you don't want to design a component, say for a bank. You don't want to design onboarding a customer in one business unit and have a completely separate one for another business unit.
Right. That's that reuse that you were referring to earlier.
You're really, you're kind of fighting against yourself.
Yeah.
And so it's not worthwhile to do it. It is a huge hit. We found when we asked companies how far along were they, companies that were pursuing multiple pathways but were not coordinated were so far behind in their transformation that it would make sense for them to kind of stop and figure out, how do you do that coordination?
Okay. All right. So we're getting a lot of questions in the chat around how long does this typically take, and what kind of return on investment can organizations and companies anticipate?
Okay, so let's start with a couple. So when we did our research, we asked several kinds of questions about where were you, what did you expect, things like that. We found that, a long transformation could take easily 10 years, but I think that I don't want anybody to be scared off by that, because I think what you want to look at is, when do you start to see measurable results? And in our research, we see firms that are on, say, paths 1, 2, 3, and 4, and then coordinated, multiple and coordinated, you start to see measurable results in a little under 2 years.
Wow.
So, and I'm not sure that you could get it much faster if you consider all of the organizational change issues that you have to do and things like that. So companies start to see measurable results in under 2 years. And it depends on what you're defining as your transformation. Some companies do it in chunks. So for instance, you could look at I'm going to call two of the companies that I know pretty well and have done pretty massive transformations. One is DBS Bank.
Yep.
They started cleaning up their kind of their legacy between 2008 and 2014. And in fact, that's about the same time frame as Schneider Electric.
Okay.
Schneider Electric, giant company, global. They started doing, they actually didn't start with a cleanup of their legacy. They actually decided to work on their customer experience first because they were so fragmented. But their transformation, I would say, kind of the cleanup, getting things together again through about 2014, but seeing all kinds of benefits after the first year or so. And then you start to put into place kind of what the fun stuff is. What's the innovation that you can start? And I would say the last, from 2014 to 2018 on those companies, you kind of are hypercharged. And what you want to think about is, what are you proposing to the board, and kind of keep track of it, dashboard against what you propose to your board and your senior management team. The ROI can be huge. I mean, the change, both DBS and Schneider Electric, a lot of these companies, what they're doing is giving themselves the opportunity. This transformation is allowing them to augment their business model, add to their business model. And this is going to go back to the first book, what's your digital business model? So for instance, Schneider Electric, when they started their transformation, they were what I call a supplier. They sold electrical products. They sold plugs, and they sold power supplies, and they sold switches. What their vision was to sell energy efficiency. Well, that's a big change that you're trying to do. And so you could see that could take 10 years to reposition yourself in. And they still sell plugs and power supplies, but they also now have this new revenue stream of, selling energy efficiency. If you look at DBS Bank, they were looking at creating a whole new way of interacting with their customer. So first they had to really kind of clean up and simplify their back end. And then you have that front end where you really innovate a lot. So
and then about measuring and dashboarding, right? I recall with DBS, they measured in customer hours saved, so that employees and customers really understood what they were doing and offering, right?
Well, we've seen a couple. So DBS, if you can come up with the right metric, it can be really motivating. So for DBS, it was customer hours saved, and that fit in very well with their how are they re-envisioning the customer journey? What are those customer journeys? And a lot of work along that. If you look at Schneider Electric in the early days, what they focused on as a metric was cross-selling. And cross-selling was important for them because by the time they had finished, they had done some acquisitions. And by the time they finished, they had 198 business units and they had 158 ERP systems. And so that meant that they had this incredibly fragmented customer experience. And cross-selling was sort of this metric of, so what we're trying to do is, if we can increase that, it means that our customers can access us and deal with us easier. And both of those metrics were very exciting and motivating for the employees.
Yeah, I could understand that. So I want to pause for a moment here, and I didn't mention at the beginning that the Center for Information Systems Research is a research center at MIT, and they have a wonderful community of sponsors. And so the research is carried out together with those sponsors and shared back with them. And so many of these cases that we're discussing are cases that Stephanie and her colleagues at CISR, the Center for Information Systems Research, have studied very deeply and written cases about. So I know that our colleague Chris Foglia from CISR has been dropping in some links to different things. You can go to the CISR website and find different types of briefings and case studies and things that are available to the public.
Absolutely. We have a fabulous consortium. It's a group of about 75 sponsors and patrons that we regularly, they've decided to join us, and they help us figure out what are the important issues facing executives today, and that informs the research that we do.
Mhm.
We engage them in the research, and then we write about it. We hold the writings we make available to anybody. So anybody can go to our website, can register for an account, and you can download the briefings and
Wonderful.
the case studies. They're called working papers and other. And then we also have events that our sponsors can come to. We just had our first in-person event, I think 3 weeks ago.
Yeah.
We're still
In
learning
June.
about how to do this in the age of COVID. I will
Yeah.
say there were it was a little harder than it had been pre-COVID, but
Mhm.
it was fantastic. I mean, the excitement in the room and getting people together talking and really finding out what are the issues that executives are facing, and
Mhm.
what can we learn from them? What can we learn from each other is, I think, the hallmark of a great CISR event.
Yeah, yeah. And what I love about this research is it's grounded in the experience of executives and companies across the world, across different industries. So very mind in hand. At MIT, where our motto is mens et manos, mind in hand, meaning, you have to be applying things and exploring them actively, not just thinking about them, reading about them, and writing about them. So that's why I think this research is so powerful. And one thing that I think is really cool, maybe we can cover briefly, Stephanie, is there are big kind of explosions that happen along these pathways that companies need to be ready for and deal with. Do you want to talk about those 4 explosions?
Sure. We identified 4 big organizational explosions, 4 big organizational decisions, things that have to happen
Mhm.
if you're going to transform yourself. And the 4 are decision rights. Have you figured out who does what in your
Mhm.
organization? Have you allocated responsibility? And one of the biggest ones is what versus how. And we're
Got it.
finding that in transformations, you really need to separate those, split those apart, because if you don't, you're going to end up with a group, you'll end up with a misalignment. Really, your leadership should be thinking about what needs to be done. And then you need to be comfortable enough to push the decision rights down to the people who are actually doing the work.
Right, right.
But then there are other ones like who can sign off on a customer initiative, who has authority to allocate
Mhm.
funds,
Yeah.
things like that.
And so the decision rights, as far as I understand, decision rights need to come first, no matter which pathway you're taking.
We have found, and this is based on not on this is more based on qualitative and cases, and looking at
Mhm.
which transformations are further along. we have found that in general, you want to start with decision rights. The other three are new ways of working. You want to be thinking about, this is going to come back to your test and learn. This is about using your data better, this evidence-based decision making, this idea that data is going to be the basis rather than gut instinct. You're going to change the way that you work so that it is more around trying something out, changing it. This is where you really want to bring the voice of the customer in too, because you want to figure out, you don't want to present them with a finished product, typically. Not always, but typically. You want to have them try something, get their input, change it a little bit. It's one of the reasons that Pathway 2 is good, is that you kind of test, learn, figure out what's good for your platform.
Yeah.
The third is, and also we find that culture, a lot of people talk about culture change. How do you get a culture change? It's hard to decide to do a culture change. You're much more likely to get some traction by changing the way that people work. And so we argue, let's try to change habits and not culture. And changing the way that people work is one way of doing that.
So there's the test and learn, coaching and communicating,
moving away from using data, all of those kinds of things. And that ties back to the decision rights, because you have to push them down. And then you have a platform mindset, and this is around that busting up silos, this idea that you want to kind of integrate, you want to have one best way of doing something, you want to think about reuse. And then the final explosion that we call is organizational surgery. Are you realigning? Are you reorganizing? And one of the things that we found is that some companies thought, you know what, we're going to have a transformation, so we're going to reorganize. And we really argue, wait, because you run the risk of solidifying something before you've had a chance to get the right. If you're going to be testing and learning, but you've already done the reorganization, you've made it more difficult on yourself. And so, and then there are degrees of your reorganization. Some companies that go slower often are doing much more incremental. You see it in every transformation. And then sometimes you have a big bang. But often we say, what we usually recommend is decision rights first, then work in tandem with your new ways of working and your platform mindset, and then try to kind of increase, you want to reduce the complexity and increase the alignment when you get to your organizational surgery.
Got it. That's really helpful. So Stephanie, what can individuals, teams, organizations do to learn more about this, to help them with the execution and decision making around which pathway and how to handle all of these things?
So it depends on where you are in the organization. And I mean, if you're lower in the organization, making a strategic choice about a pathway is going to be tough, because usually that is up at the senior level. But I think that once you are once the transformation has been discussed and chosen, really thinking about how do you kind of embody that. If you're going to do a pathway 1, it's really about kind of putting your head down and thinking about reusing and automating and things like that, which can happen a lot lower in the organization. I think that new ways of working and platform mindset, anybody in the organization can start with. And these new ways of working, I mean, think about, where could you do an experiment? You have to start somewhere, and you may be able to say, what's the data that I do have, and can I start an experiment and do an experiment and start practicing on something like that?
And
Uh,
it can be so simple, it's just funny. I'm sitting here thinking, Stephanie, of the simplest example we could give of test and learn. Stephanie and I both love to cook, and we share recipes sometime. And when I get a recipe from Stephanie, she gives me notes that tell me what she did, how she changed it and why along the way, and what she thinks she would do differently and what she suggests I try when I try the recipe, right? So we're iterating and learning, and that's a really simple example of testing and learning and using data and what you learn to help improve things.
That's exactly it. So I think that this idea for the individual is to think about what it is, what are digital, what would it take to succeed in the digital economy as an individual? And it's going to be that curiosity. Can you learn? Could you decide that, what I'm going to do is go to executive education, and I'm going to pick up some information about, say, in my course, we don't have a course yet on the book, but we have one on the previous book, which is around what's your digital business model. And in that course, we have a framework, and you can start to think about and practice, because I've created a workbook around what are the kinds of things that might need to change. And so executive education is one way that you can start to learn. There's also finding people within your organization and developing a community of practice. We've seen, especially around reuse, that this was one of the big things, because you're not going to figure out where are all the opportunities that you could reuse. And often, let's face it, large organizations, how do you share information? And sometimes getting these cross, multi-divisional communities of practice is one way of figuring out what is it that other people are doing. I'm trying to think of some other, but those are some of the ways. Really, education, curiosity, and then once you learn something, how do you teach other people in your organization? How do you collaborate with them? How do you it's one of the reasons that I'm so excited about MIT CISR's vision, which is we have done research and we want to share it, and we want you to share it too. So you can share it within your organization and start discussions about what might need to be done. So as soon as you know that your company is doing a transformation, what's your role in it? I mean, kind of brainstorm. What's your role and what can you do there?
Yeah. So it's interesting you're saying that, because we were on earlier. Stephanie and I also work on customized executive education programs that really are bespoke programs helping organizations and enterprise execute on their digital transformation and define and cascade that common language and frameworks throughout an organization. And we were having kind of an office hours, we call it a meet and mingle, with one of our partners today. And teams met and shared what they had been doing and what they plan to do to share the learnings. And there was so much energy around it. And folks were sharing articles from CISR or presentations and things, having brown bag lunches, asking the team to try things out and learn together, all kinds of cool ways you can kind of continue the conversation. Again, so much of this is about curiosity and understanding that you need to be learning continuously. We had one gentleman today say, I saw there was a module to watch on blockchain, and I thought, I already know all of that. And he says, but I watched it, and there were all kinds of things I didn't know since the last time I had read up on it and that sort of thing. So, it's constantly evolving, and we have to constantly be curious and educate ourselves and others.
Right. And thinking about and talking to others. So it's not just about educating yourself, but it's also talk to others and find out what other viewpoints are. And I think that you can do that when we talk to executives about how do they make themselves more digitally savvy so that they can do these transformations. Putting together a network of like-minded individuals is one way, and then other things that you could do that might be fun, kind of low cost. One was a lot of companies like DBS do hackathons. They figure a problem that is not so big, but it can be, say, solved in a weekend-long hackathon, and they get people used to working in a different way, because those hackathons, you're doing that testing and learning, you're doing that iterating, you're practicing.
I think they also did hack to hire too, didn't they? DBS?
They did hack to hire, yes, because they're looking at talent there. And then they will also do things like DBS did customer journey mapping. And what they did there was have an executive in charge of a customer journey, but everybody participated in the customer journey mapping, so that you start to see, this is the problems that they're having. So I think finding these opportunities where you can add to your skills, where you can meet other people. The interesting thing about customer journey mapping is it often goes across the organization. So it's a way to kind of meet other people in different places facing the same kind of issues as you. Meg, when we were talking, you had a really low cost way. What was it that?
Oh, yeah. I was, it's funny. I was thinking of that because I was noticing in the chat culture change, and culture was coming up. And, I think there's a great example from DBS that you can Google and look up. It's a way of running meetings that is called Mojo, and it means you have a meeting organizer and a joyful observer, and there's a time limit, to how long meetings can be, and that's saving employee hours. And that was big in the DBS transformation. But we work with an organization that did action learning as part of their program. And it was the simplest no cost thing, an experiment one of the teams did. They had a department commit to assigning a person at every meeting to be the voice of the customer. And they collected data on it, and about the outcomes of the meeting and how it changed and all of that. And it had tremendous impact. That cost nothing. It changed the conversation. Even in departments, you think they're not thinking about the customer as much. So, it doesn't have to be, there are pieces of this that aren't about technology, and they're about culture and other things that enable all of this. And we can all be thinking about what can we do and what can we learn, and then how do we share it with others so that it can be reused.
And when we're talking about a transformation and a digital transformation, digital is part of it. I mean, let's face it, technology is the backbone of every modern organization. No organization, I mean, my background is in organizational behavior. No organization can exist now without technology. But if you're really talking about a transformation, a digital transformation, it's really about changing the way that you work. It's around changing the way that you think about how you use the technology. It's around changing the role of the customer. It's a lot of these people things. It really is around, there's a culture piece to it. There's a work piece to it. And technology kind of infuses all of this. But it's not just about putting in a system and saying, yep, okay, we're transformed. That's not it at all. And that's not what we found in talking to our all of the people that we talked to for this new book of ours.
Great. Well, I know we've been sharing things in the chat, and there are questions and insights there. We'll be gathering that up, and this recording will live on LinkedIn at this link, and we will be following up with some further insights and answers to questions. We're almost at time here. Stephanie, any last word of encouragement to our friends on the line here that are in the midst of a digital transformation or about to embark on one?
I think one, read up, make your, know what the issues are that you're trying to accomplish. What are you trying to accomplish? And then be curious. Get out there, figure out, reading up is part of that. And then these transformations need everyone in the organization. So I think that, figure out what your role is, how you're going to collaborate, and do your part in helping everybody come together.
Thanks, Stephanie.
Thank you, Meg.
Sure. This was really fun. Thanks to everyone who joined us. We were delighted to be here with you today. We invite you to check out the resources that are available on the CISR website, to take a look at Stephanie's course that runs in our open enrollment series. And reach out and let us know how you're doing. We would love to hear from you, because we like to learn from companies and individuals and executives from around the world. And that's how we share more and get better at what we do.
That is absolutely true. We're always looking for great examples, great case studies, and your insights. That's how we learn here.
Great. Well, thanks, everyone. Take care and good luck. Thanks.